Welcome to the 1958 Lawyer, the show for attorneys who know the old model isn't working anymore. The billable hour, the 12-hour day, the expensive office no one visits. Your hosts Ron Boxtaller and Clinton Ind are here to question all of that and more by exploring smarter, healthier, more flexible ways to run a law firm. No more burnout, no more outdated expectations, just real conversations with attorneys who are proving there's a better way. If you're ready to build a law firm that's profitable and livable, you're in the right place. Now here are your hosts, Ron and Clinton.
All right, welcome to the show. My name is Ron Boxtaller. I'm your co-host along with my partner, Clinton. We together own a model office suites. Good to have you here today. Today we got a really special guest, Jared. Thank you for joining us. Good friends, been with a client of mine for 7-8+ years, somewhere in that range. So Jared is born in rural state of New York, moved to Chicago in 2012, where he went to Chicago Kent College of Law. He's been practicing for 10 years, has been self-employed for 5 years, and Jared's heavily involved in the music scene, playing drums himself, which I think you just came from drum practice. Attending many concerts, festivals. He's very outgoing. He's actually an avid outdoorsman, loves traveling, including hiking and camping. I don't know that you put in this bio, but he's a great runner, like, Olympic class runner. He Boston Marathon, of course. And he's won the Chicago Race Judicata, the annual lawyer annual 5K twice. Currently getting back into running and hopes to run the Chicago Marathon again very soon. Jared, thanks for coming. Welcome to the show. It's good to see you again, and Happy New Year.
Thank you for having me. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everybody. Happy holidays. I don't know about Olympic class running, but I'll take the compliment.
I know we talk about this a lot since I'm not that good of a runner, but I like to think I am. And then I meet someone like you, and I'm like, man, he can really run fast.
There's always somebody out there to make you feel slow. That's what I've learned,
There's a lot more of those people for Ron and I, though. That's the issue. There's a lot of those people out there. Yeah.
Yeah, funny story. Clinton and I have signed up for the Ironman in Japan in September, right? So now the training program just getting started.
Yeah.
Now we need to get on the game, right? We need to start, really putting it together. So I might take you up on running with you here sometime soon.
Yeah, like I said, I'm just trying to get back into it. I'm a very different runner than I was a decade ago. So trying to be a little cautious and get into it slowly but surely. But went to a podiatrist and we're good to go. So
Awesome. Well, look, let's get started. I want to talk about your career. You've come a long way in a relatively short period of time. So why don't we start? Let's tell us about why you went into law, kind of how you ended up in Chicago, and we'll go from there.
sure. Of course, I feel like people ask this a lot to any attorney, and I wish I had a better answer than, the typical Law and Order and CSI were the really cool, interesting things when I was a kid. And it just always seemed like, how cool could it be to be in a courtroom? And I was very passionate about criminal law in my early stages of even before law school. I clerked with small town public defender back in New York when I was in college. He sort of gave me my first taste of going to court, and you could be adversarial but also professional. He was going at it with, they call them district attorneys in New York, the equivalent of state's attorneys here, and then he'd go get drinks with them afterwards. Seeing that level of, you can be competitive but be respectful and have camaraderie between your opponents. That was always very interesting to me. And then I graduated college. I graduated a year early. Actually went to college with 53 credits from high school. I took all of the AP classes, all of the college classes.
You're showing your age there because, when I was in school, we didn't have those classes.
That really set me up I was always the young one after that. I moved here in 2012. I was 21 when I started law school. And I think that was a bit of a challenge at first. Like, people, as crazy as it sounds to think back, I remember people making comments of, what do you think you're doing here at that age? Or how do you think you know what you're doing at 21, 22? And, I think my life has always been just always did what I thought the next step was. I didn't have any attorneys in the family. I was the first one to do 4-year college, well, 3 years for me. But I really just kept doing what I thought the next level would be, the next level, the next level. And I think coming to law school, I applied to a ton of law schools. I applied to, I think, 14 or 15 law schools across the country because I didn't know.
Yeah.
I can't begin to explain how small the town is that I'm from. I mean, we had high school class was 183 graduating, but that was 3 counties worth of students in one school. There's more. I was home in October and, I was feeding the deer in the backyard and being surrounded by like 20 deer. So, I mean, it is more animals than people, a lot of the area.
Ah,
Mm.
that's just like Clinton's growing up there in Australia, right?
Yeah, kangaroos. There are 20,
Kangaroos,
Yeah.
20 kangaroos hanging out.
All
Yeah, yeah,
right,
yeah. Constantly. Yeah.
It's
all
very
right.
similar, I'm
Same thing.
sure.
Yeah.
And that's where, I kind of just is a lot of trial and error. And I got denied by a ton of law schools. Uh, I went to college in Oneonta, New York at SUNY Oneonta, one of the state University of New York schools. And that was a step up from where I grew up. So that was like a college town. And that gave me a taste of like, I can walk to get pizza or go to a bar or a restaurant or those things. So I knew after college that I wanted a city after that. I wanted to go to law school in a city. So I applied to a lot of schools. And then it came down to Chicago Kent College of Law and University of San Diego, which is sort of always a
Hmm.
interesting choice to remember every winter here in Chicago. But, it really just seemed to me to be a easier sell to my parents as an only child that I was only moving halfway across the country opposed to fully across the country. And part of
Jim,
me thinks that if I went to San Diego, I might have just quit law school and become a beach
Surfer.
bum. So
Yeah, for
it's
sure.
Chicago seemed more realistic and better for my life goal.
well, you got to know that Clinton at one point in time started up a little stand. Would you have surfboards or paddle
Oh, the
boards?
stand-up paddle boards. Yeah, I had a
Stand-up
stand-up
paddleboards here in
paddleboard shop
Chicago.
in Mission.
I,
Yeah, Michigan, Lake Michigan. Sorry.
I
Yeah,
think that would have been my life in San Diego had I gone
it
to
would have been
San
a good
Diego.
life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me ask this question.
You
You're
know,
going into college, you're going to law school. How were you going to pay for it, or how did you end up paying for it?
loans.
Okay.
As I'm reminded frequently when I see the outstanding loans still, and I think really that is consistent with what I'm saying in that like I really didn't know. I didn't have any guidance as to what the next steps were, how to do it. In hindsight, would it have been, I don't want to say easier, but would it have relieved some stress had I took any time off to work in between college or rate or get any sort of savings? I think that probably would have saved a lot of
Sure.
money and maybe I wouldn't have had the big student loans bill that I have now. But it's really didn't know. I can't begin to looking back, it's comical to see how much you don't know in the moment, and I think
Hmm.
that remains true through many different eras of my life. And I think looking back, it was quite a culture shock for me to move to Chicago. To I think those beginning stages of law school, I was this country kid with very little, if any, savings, but it was made clear to me that you got to be networking, you got to start meeting people. And so I was going out with my classmates to bars, terrified at the thought of like being in charge of the bill at the end of the day and like how am I going to pay for these drinks or any of these different things, but feeling like if I don't go to the bar then I'm not going to socialize, I'm not going to make these connections, and how am I going to kind of, in my mind it was picking away at sort of a learning curve, but also I moved here not knowing anybody and I knew that I needed to kind of hit the ground running to start building my network here if I had any chance of having a successful career here. Because I saw all the people who were second generation attorneys, third generation attorneys who took over the business from their
Yeah.
father or their mother or any of those things. And I knew that wasn't going to be me. So that's kind
It,
of,
think about what you just said about that fear of, so they're going to give me the bill. Like, am I going to pay this? And I don't got enough money to pay for everything. That's like a
Fear
rite
that
of
I really,
passage.
a
That's
fear that I
like,
only recently have started not having. So, it, and the reality too is I went to law school to be a public defender, like, period. There was no other option in my mind. It was really cool to me to think about moving to Chicago because, especially, I mean, small town boy I was, in your mind, everybody knows what people outside of Chicago hear about Chicago. And that's exactly what I knew about Chicago before I moved here, is that, oh, it must be a crime-ridden city. And, even in the first years of law school and my career, I go home and I know family and friends think I'm like dodging bullets on the way to work or school, or like,
of course.
people are very ignorant to big city life because you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
And so I moved here to be a public defender, and I got to start working with the PD's office. I started with the homicide task force my first year in Chicago, which was just mind blowing. I mean, you can imagine the stories you hear in the homicide task force of the public defender's office.
Yeah.
I used to joke that, I'd look at pictures and be like, okay, is this a still from the movie Saw, or is this real life? And the answer is usually it was real life. And some really
Ah,
crazy, traumatic stories. But it really, one, working for the public defender's office gave me just such a great footing and start of being in court, doing litigation, both oral advocacy as well as written advocacy. And it really just set the tone for like the bar I had for like, what's a bad day practicing law? Because at the PD's office, that was my client spitting at me or my client going to jail or somebody losing their life. Where nowadays, yes, the stress is there and there's high stake days, but it's always just money. Nobody's going to prison, nobody's losing their livelihood in that way. But I think I still look back to those days at the PD's office and think, okay, yeah, maybe today was a rough day practicing law, but nobody's losing their freedom because
no,
of
It's
anything, for on
great.
my
It's
end
so
at
great
least.
to have that perspective to be able I mean, there's so much stress just practicing in civil court, right? And depending on who opposing counsel is, like you were talking about the decorum of being and the camaraderie of opposing counsel, but I feel like a lot of times that has gone away of late.
I fully agree, though. I feel the exact same way, and I
But to be
talk
able to
about
have
it.
that perspective, yeah, to be able to reach back and be able to move past it for sure, it'd be helpful, right?
And I talk about it a lot because I joke with my friends. I joke that on a daily basis, I think to myself, I have found myself in probably one of the most contentious adversarial jobs you could ever have in your life. Every day I'm fighting. I only get paid if I win. I am constantly, I think on a daily basis, I'm either taking depositions or dealing with people where it seems fairly clear they're just lying to my face or gaslighting me or telling me that the sky's not blue or any of these different things. And that's not who I am as a person at all. I like to say that I know how to fight, but I've never actually had to fight, and I don't want to fight, but it's exactly that. I do feel like the lack of civility at times is heartbreaking. And as a young attorney, I remember the days of older attorneys trying to take advantage of me, I remember attorneys muttering things under the record so that the court reporter couldn't hear it up, but that I could hear it. And, although I'm not a fighter, I refuse to be taken advantage of or underestimated. And so, although I'm not a fighter, I am mostly a lot, like, very competitive from my running days. So the second I get any sort of feeling that's like somebody's doing me wrong, that sort of flips that trigger. And I think there's a lot of those feelings these days. And I try to tell younger attorneys, I do a lot of mentorship, and it really, it forces you to be pretty confident in yourself because other people are going to sense if you're not confident in yourself because they're going to try to take advantage of it. And I think lots of times attorneys phrase it as, oh, I'm just doing what's best for the client. Well, there's ways to do what's best for your client and still be civil and still be professional and respectful. Again, going back to the days of my small town public defender, I think about those days. And, and same, yeah, with comparing civil versus criminal and private, you know, I remember the early days of practicing law where people would come back and they'd be like, "Oh, I had a really rough day in court today. I got yelled at by opposing counsel or yelled at by a judge." And that would always be my response is like, "Well, did your client spit at you today? Did you
Right.
Right.
see your client naked in jail today?" Like, it's a very different bar.
Yeah.
You've had a couple things because you always had a theme as you wanted to be in court. Now that's not the case for a lot of attorneys, but that's something that it started with you early on. So fast forward, you've gone through your challenges. Absolutely. Let's talk about you've had maybe I know last year, 2 years ago, you had one of your biggest cases and you lost. So let walk us through why you took the case and what didn't work out well because I believe you talked to the jury afterwards, correct?
Yeah, I did. And it's hard talking about losses, and it was almost pretty much exactly a year ago. It ended December 20th of last year. It was, I mean, I was coming out of moving to a new place and it was a big trial. It was there were 17 defendants total, five defense firms that I went against. Each defense firm had two or three attorneys working on the file at trial, sitting at they had to bring in significant number of extra tables for our trial and fit it into our daily center courtroom. And it was sort of comical to see on a daily basis. It's just a room full of people and then me walking in with my client every day.
Yeah, was it just you? That was just you against all of those other attorneys.
Against the world, it felt like.
Wow.
And it kind of gave, one of the attorney defend, and I had a good enough relate. I had an existing good relationship with, I think, a good handful of the attorneys, and I think by the end, I think we all had good relationships because I think they respected that I took it on by myself. And one of them called me the Lone Ranger at one point, and my client actually was an attorney as well, which a litigation education defense attorney. So that was intimidating as well. This attorney client of mine who had been practicing 20 years more, I think, than I have, but he was trusted me unconditionally, gave me a ton of support, and really stayed in his own lane as the client and trusted me, which was very meaningful and very affirming in a lot of ways. And, it was not only the biggest thing it was the biggest thing I've ever taken on in my life, really. And I knew it was going to be going into it, but it also happened to be the first trial I really took on by myself. So it just happened to be that my first trial was like bigger than any should be for one person. And I remember talking to people leading up to it, and the response was always the same. And it was always with good intention, but like I could tell when people are like, "You're doing what by yourself?" You're like, they would hear about it and it would always be the same thing. Like, "Well, who do you have helping you? Where's the support you're going to have?" And it's not like I was ignorant to what it was going to be, but I'm just very confident in my capabilities. And I really felt that I could do it on my own. I thought that at the end of the day, there's been many times in my career where I felt that employers of mine didn't trust me with certain levels of work because of my age. And of course, I mean, like I've said, I was always the young one. So maybe it's me feeling like I'm underestimated, feeling like I have something to prove. And there's probably some truth to plenty of that. But I wanted the chance to prove that I could do this by myself because at the end of the day, yeah, I knew it would give me a lot of information no matter what. Either I completely bomb it, in which case, okay, I guess I'm never doing that ever again, or I am able to do it, in which case, and it's now a year later, it has come to fruition. I do genuinely think I can do anything after that because there's no part of me, and I've talked to the jury, I've talked to the defense, I got brunch with one of the defense attorneys a couple months ago. I've talked to the judge who oversaw the trial, and everybody's made clear that there's no part of me losing that trial, that was because of me. That was because of me or me doing it on my own. And frankly, at the end of the day, I mean, everybody's probably going to have their own thoughts about their own losses, but I talked to 6 of the 12 jurors, and 6 of them told me that they thought I proved every part of the case except for one part of it, proximate cause. And I mean, the way they just probably
Oh,
haunt me a little bit for the rest of my life. They were like, well, we just don't think that you definitively proved proximate cause, or we don't think that you 100% proved proximate cause. And I'm like, I'm sorry, where are we getting definitive from? Where are we getting 100% from?
Yeah.
And I mean, I'm sure most attorneys are listening to this. It's preponderance of the evidence. It's not beyond a reasonable doubt. So, I've talked to the defense attorney, and she said they said the same thing to her as well. So at the end of the day, yeah, I do think I got a little screwed, and I'm still frankly paying for that trial in some ways. But that's the whole point of this whole world, right? Is that I tell all my clients, no matter what the facts are, you can never guarantee what the outcome's going to be. Sometimes juries get it wrong.
but that
And
good, but that's only been 1 year. I thought it was actually farther back, but only 1 year ago, you've had tremendous bounce back. So 2025, an outstanding year. Kind of, what did you learn? What did you take away? Because you've turned things around.
I think, in one hand, yeah, that mindset of, hey, I was able to do that, I should be able to do anything, because I've always said I have a lot of other cases that objectively on paper are worth more than what that case was, but also they should be less work because they're only against one defendant or they're only against one defense firm or things like that. So, I think on one hand, it was a very telling experience because for me, although yes, I would have loved to win, and it's a very expensive lesson to lose a trial. I mean, I feel very comfortable talking about these things now that I'm kind of out of it. But all in all, I'll have spent over $200,000 of my own money on that trial. As you maybe know from what I've told you about my upbringing, there's not a point in my life that I've had $200,000. And I deliberately have never even told my parents that because they think
Yeah.
that
They're gonna know now.
Now they're
it
gonna
would
know now.
baffle them to even think that you could spend that amount of money on something. But,
Yeah.
these cases are so expensive and so time intensive that, I think it was very affirming. And what I ultimately learned is what I was hoping to learn, which is that I can do anything if I'm given the time and the resources to do so. And that's kind of my ultimate mindset is I put on that trial very difficult time in my life with no financial stability, and it's very hard putting on a trial when I mean, I remember I was like booking flights for an expert while like witnesses were being examined. I was doing everything.
That's crazy.
And
That's absolutely crazy that you
there
were doing all that.
were there were 13 experts total. I had 6 on our end. There were 7 defense experts. It was a 3-week med mal trial, and it was truly a wild experience. But I will never forget it, and it'll constantly be the kind of bar where I'm able to be like, hey, and I already ask myself this usually in every capacity in my life, which is like, okay, Jared, is what I'm dealing with right now the hardest thing I've ever had to deal with in my life? And 99% of the time, the answer is no. I knew going into that trial that the answer was yes. but but now the answer is again no for most things. And that, I've gotten through all of those things in my life. So chances are I will get through blank thing that I'm dealing with in the moment. And that's really, I think, the ultimate thing I learned from that is, I learned that I'm able to do exactly what I thought I could do. But if there's a big difference between, I think everybody deserves to have some blind faith in themselves, but there's a big difference between blind faith and actually having it on paper. And, at the end of the day, people are going to see that on paper and see Jared lost the trial. It is what it is. They're not going to know any of this context. They're not going to know any of the reality. I'm sure even the defendant doctors and everybody that I sued think that this annoying long-haired tall attorney got what he deserved because they didn't do anything wrong. No, they did stuff wrong. They just got lucky. Like,
So, all
and
right,
that's the reality.
you've been on your own now for 5, 6, I don't know, several years. Anything you would change, and any like, man, I shouldn't have done this, or you? It sounds like you're pretty comfortable with your decision to go on your own.
I'm very comfortable. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a decision that I ever imagined for myself or that I ever planned for. I did originally have a business partner. We split up amicably. And I think my take or my feeling about it is how I think about a lot of things in life is I really don't believe in regrets or believe in like changing things because it inherently all the decisions I made in the past got me here talking with you all, and I am very proud of everything I've done in the past to get to this point. Are there a lot of things I could have done to make life easier? Probably. Yeah. I mean, I think that at the end of the day, this line of law and area of law is so expensive and so difficult to pay for on your own that I think it there could have been a lot of sleepless nights avoided had I had any sort of nest egg before coming into this. But a lot of this goes back to what I had already said is again, you just really don't know what you don't know. And
Right.
I thankfully, although the cases themselves are very expensive, frankly, Mata and a lot of other very deliberate choices I make are allow me to keep this firm very lean. And, of course, I've started having some settlements that allow me to have a bit of financial stability, really for the first time in my life. Mm. So the question then becomes, okay, do I hire an employee? Do I get some support staff? But the problem is that I know what I could do by myself. And
Right.
Yeah.
so I think for a multitude of different reasons, I think my default will always be see what I can do by myself. I mean, I'm an only child. I moved out here by myself. There's a lot of parts of my life that I look back on and I go, hey, Jared, it's a very kind of lone wolf mentality, I think, a lot of the time. But in a lot of ways, it's served me. Is it always necessary? Should I maybe be better at asking for help sometimes? Of course. But it is a level of independence that I'm very proud of. And now working for myself, kind of really being on my own, I've never been more independent and self-sufficient in my life. And it's something I'm very proud of.
Yeah.
Yep. Well, Prantu, I've watched you kind of go through a long stretch from when you started the firm to where you're at today, and it's been amazing. It's been, I mean, I know it's been hard as hell, but it's been, great to have from an outsider looking in.
It means
And
a
I,
lot. I appreciate it.
yeah, and I appreciate you being an Amada client the whole time. We do need to sit and talk to you about getting some assistance with you. As you know, like there's some things. I actually just wrote an article about what you can outsource. So we'll get together when you get back from skiing, and we'll talk about that over a drink. Um,
Such a difficult thing to get the help. It's such a difficult leap to make.
It's an interesting dynamic because, like, think of it the same way I think of AI, honestly, recently, is because everybody and their mother are telling me I need to spend all this money on AI, I need to do ABCD. And admittedly, I probably don't use AI as much as plenty of people do, as plenty of people should. But I also frequently see the attorneys that screw up using AI. And, I see the attorneys that rely on AI to review 1,000 pages of medical records and miss something on page 967. I'm never going to miss page 967. Probably I'm not going to sleep as a result of it, but like I always say I'd rather spend another 3 hours immersing myself in my case than 3 hours sleeping. I can sleep whenever. And I think that's the dynamic with AI is for me, I keep hearing AI as, hey, use AI and then you can be so efficient and save time to take on a whole bunch of more work to do. I'm not trying to take on levels of work that I've done previous in my career. I'm trying to take on instead smaller amounts of work that I'm very passionate about and clients and cases that I'm very passionate about where I think I can give it my all versus sometimes there's been days where, yeah, my caseload is so high that I don't necessarily feel like I'm the time to give each case what I want, which would be my best for each case. And do I still get the job done? Sure, but I want be able to give each case my best. And I think that's where, you know, hiring employees or using AI more sounds like me trying to increase my caseload, which isn't necessarily my goal right
Right.
now. I'm trying to really focus on a handful of cases that I care about deeply.
Smart.
Yeah.
Looking back, you got any advice for those young attorneys? We've probably spin up 10, maybe 10 to 20 law firms a month. So, there's a lot of people going out starting their own practice. Kind of what are maybe two things you would say, hey, look, here's your advice to them. Here's what I've gone through. Here's what I tell you.
Sure, I think I think about it a lot because again, I never necessarily imagined a day where I'd own my own business or own my own firm. And lots of times I don't even think of it as owning my own business. I just think that I'm practicing law by myself. Mm. But I think having now done it for 3.5 or 4 years or so, I think what it's shown me is I think a lot more people could be capable of doing it, but we're not really taught that we're capable of doing it. It would be a disservice to the machine of our legal field if we taught all these young attorneys that, hey, maybe you could do this on your own. And I think it certainly takes a level of confidence and a level of belief in yourself, but I think everybody deserves to have more reasons to be confident in themselves. And I think it means putting yourself in positions to sort of build that confidence. And I was very fortunate in my early career to kind of be thrown in the thick of things and get a ton of really good practical experience. I mean, this was all pre-COVID, and I used to be in court every single day of the week. I mean, I think in 3 years of my beginning of my career, I took like 300 or 400 depositions, and it takes a bit of kind of self recollection and self reflection to realize, okay, where do I maybe feel like my skill set is missing that I need to develop? Like for me, when I started this line of work, I didn't know anything about medicine or medical records. I wanted to be a public defender. I knew
Right.
about police reports. I knew about like those side of things. So I remember the days of being in the office till early hours of the morning because the thought of reviewing 1,000 pages of medical records was so daunting. And I knew that I had this sort of plateau or this learning curve that I needed to pick away at and plateau on. Um, so I think for young attorneys, I think everybody deserves to find ways to be more confident in yourself. And I think that involves usually throwing yourself into uncomfortable positions, um, but really being realistic with yourself about what you're good at, but also what you're maybe not good at so that you can start focusing on those things. Practically also, I knew that I knew nothing about business. My old business partner was the business kind of mentality side of things, but I knew the network and I knew how to bring in cases and clients. And it really was my intake that made me feel comfortable with doing this on my own. And I think that's universal for any business. If somebody is going to be starting a business, you better make sure that you've got a network and clients and people coming in. And I think that just kind of usually involves hitting the ground running. And I like to think of it as like strategic networking. I used to, there was a point where I got really sick of just networking
Yeah.
with attorneys in general. Is I was going to these networking events and it was always a ton of free alcohol, but I was competing with everybody else in the room for business. So, I started getting more strategic with who I was networking a lot with more non-attorneys, networking with specific types of attorneys, solo practitioners. I knew I wasn't going to get any business from an older attorney who already had a PI attorney that he's used for years and years and years. So, it was kind of being aware of that. And I think the last piece of advice I'd give both to my younger self as well as just younger attorneys in general is just like take care of yourself. And it's so much easier said than done. I really thought when I graduated law school, I thought, you hear from everybody, hey, by the way, you're about to get into a field where addiction is high, alcohol abuse, drug abuse,
Yes.
divorce, suicide. They give you the rundown, and we get it every year as attorneys. It's like, hey, mental health, you're joining a field that's not known for its mental health stability. And it's a bit scary to hear that when you're going through all these things. But when I was in law school, I thought I'll be fine. I was in my best shape of my life in law school opposed to college because I started really hitting training for marathons and I was so fast in law school. I was like, I'm doing this in law school. I'll be fine once I start practicing. And then I blinked and 5 years passed and I didn't work out at all for 5 years. And I really hated it about myself because that was a big point of pride always was my
Right.
fitness. And, you know, it's just so important and you have to take care of yourself, whatever that means. I mean, some sort of fitness or exercise or just going on walks or being outside or anything is so important, but also just having a life outside of law and having hobbies and having activities. Again, it's a million times easier said than done. But if you don't take care of yourself, your bosses, the field itself, judges, adversaries are all going to take advantage of your availability. And nobody's going to take care of you better than you are. And, there's always going to be another class of younger attorneys to work 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 hours a week, but it's just not sustainable. And we all know how burnt out people can get. It's not that I'm working any less nowadays, but I'm working for myself. I have a lot more control over my schedule. And in my mind, there's always a big difference between being tired and being burnt out. I
Right.
remember the days of being burnt out, and I refuse to get to that ever again. I sometimes I'm perpetually tired, but that's I think part of the business.
But you're able to go out and do a lot of things. Controlling your schedule. That's like the big piece right there.
Yeah.
Exactly. And knowing that, I I just always knew that I wanted to have a life outside of law. And sometimes there's been overlap, but I've never I'm the happiest I've ever been currently, and that's been true for the vast majority of me being self-employed, even in the very tough, difficult moments, I've been able to be like, hey, this is ridiculous, and there's no reason why I should be having to deal with this right now, but it's a lot better dealing with it for myself and for my clients than for other people. And I think it's allowed me to really just focus on the work. I think that most days, the work is stressful in and of itself, but I'm not stressed out about like firm politics or drama. There's no drama. There's
Wait, you
no
got
drama
politics in
at
that firm?
no. There's no drama at JM Reynolds Law because it's it's all me, and it allows me to really just focus on the work and focus on my clients, which is incredibly rewarding.
You know,
Jared, do you also find that, like, I always found that, when you're courting attorneys or referring attorneys, the interest was in the personal, right? I mean, and you have to have some personal anecdote, something to talk about other than just practicing law in order to get the attorneys to actually even want to talk to you, let alone give you a case, right?
Absolutely, and I'm very proud of the relationships I have with my clients. I mean, I just settled a case that I worked on for 8 years,
Oh,
and
wow.
this client, it was originally for this 93-year-old woman, and it was her son was my client. He was in his 70s. He trusted me for 6 or 7 years. I don't think we even met for 5 years because of COVID and all of those things. We used to joke that we were like pen pals more than anything. And he, it meant a lot how much this man trusted me. And unfortunately, I ended up passing away. So I ended up now his wife was my client. And yeah, I mean, I was invited to the funeral. I am heavily involved in my clients' lives where they're updating me on when they have kids. And, even that case I lost, the client, he's gone out of his way to try to send me business since then. So like I lost his case and he is still, he's trying to find a way to compensate me despite obviously that not being the agreement. I lost the case. That's it. It is what it is. But I think it says something that even despite losing the case, he wants to keep in touch with me and wants to send me business. I care deeply about my clients, and it's nice, and I care deeply about them, and it's also never lost on me the amount of trust they put into me in some of the darkest moments of their lives. And that's just something that is never lost on me. And it's a very unique aspect of both being a lawyer, but being a lawyer in this specific field and being a specific, like doing it by myself, and
Yeah.
I think they also, I look very different than I did a decade ago. There's a part of working by myself that has been incredibly rewarding because I find that I am able to be myself more than I ever have in practicing law and express myself more than I ever have practicing law. We're inherently forced to kind of fit into boxes being attorneys, and individuality is not necessarily the goal for, I think, the legal field. And I think I've had a lot of clients who I think really respect that and see that in me and are more open with me because they feel more comfortable talking with me and sharing deep parts of their life because they know that they're seeing a very genuine side of me 24/7. And I think that that's allowed me to really build incredibly meaningful relationships with my clients that last much longer than the case itself.
I think it's great. I think, one of the things we talk to our paralegals about is, in my personal opinion, I think there's a lot of flexibility in the Code of Civil Procedure for insertion of individuality into a case, like how you litigate a case, how you want to strategize about a case. And I feel like the more individuality you can inject into it, rather than sitting in that box that everybody else seems to want to be in, the more the judges appreciate you, the more opposing counsel wants to kind of talk to you and is willing to, you know, have a good conversation with you about things that may not even be relating to directly to the case. And I think it's really good.
Totally. And I think back to that trial of last year, it was a bit comical walking into this courtroom full of people, but every day, me being the plaintiff's attorney and my client, I knew that the eyes were on me just about most of the time. And it was a bit fun putting on this show, and I felt like I was able to put on a show, if you will, in a very unique way because I've never been more confident in myself. I've always had feelings of confidence, but the reality looking back on my life is sure, I've described this before as, I used to be very confident in my work ethic and my accomplishments. Like, I am confident because I won a race, or I am confident because I got into law school, or ABCD. I was very rarely confident in just myself for who I am or for my sense of self. And I think nowadays it's been very rewarding to kind of be able to have that level of confidence in myself because I'm not focused as much as I used to. It's not something you really realize until hindsight is I used to be incredibly aware and concerned about how I was being perceived by other people. I mean, I don't think I've mentioned it, but I mean, I'm bisexual and like, being in the closet for so long, I was hyper aware of how I was being perceived in society because God forbid I'm perceived in a way that isn't straight, then that ruins my biggest secret of my whole life. Like, you know, I was constantly aware of my actions, what I was saying, what I was doing. You know, I used to be worried about being that runner in short shorts because I'm like, oh, well, there we go. Everybody's going to know because I'm wearing short shorts, you know, but that's just the ridiculous things that you get caught up on when you are not able to just be your true self, or when you're so preoccupied with what others are thinking about you. And it's this fine line because, you know, I always joke, you know, yeah, I've got my nails painted. I wear a lot more jewelry than I ever used to wear. I do still present a very specific self in front of a jury, you know, because it's easy to say, I don't care what anybody thinks about me. Well, that's not entirely true. I do care what 12 jurors think about me. I do care. So it's this fine line, but I agree with you completely, Clint. I think there's a lot more room to be expressive and a lot more room to be yourself in the legal field than we are shown or taught. And I'm not saying there's still not a need to, you know, put on a suit and be professional and all of these things. I think there is this fine line, but I think it's a fine line that should be towed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, we got to wrap it up, but I do want to say, I think you're like the modern day, like Suits, right? Remember that show about lawyers? I mean, you're going through all those you've gone through so many tough times, and you're coming out, you're on top now, you're getting ready to go skiing. You got a lot of great things going on. And I'm really excited to see in 5 and 10 years, because all these things are just adding up, and your experiences, they're real experiences. Like, you're actually out there practicing law and to become a really great attorney, which I think, and you know, of the thousands of attorneys I've dealt with, there's only a few that I can go, wow, they've just gone through it. And I'm like, I'm living it while you're going through it, and I'm seeing the change. So it's awesome. And I'm super excited for you, and I'm very proud to call you a friend. So thank you. Clinton, last words, and I'll give Jared a last word after that.
I know I want to hang out with you more, Jared. I mean, most of my friends graduated college undergrad in 6 years, so I think I need someone like you to help balance things out a little bit in my personal network. So I'm looking forward to a beer very soon.
It means a lot, and I greatly appreciate all the kind words, Ron, and I feel the same. It's been very rewarding getting to know you and to have that level of support. There have been many times where Amada has been quite a resource for me over these last 5 years, and so I'm greatly appreciative of that. And it just means a lot. You know, I don't really look back much in my life, and I can't say I really reflect a ton. So things like this are a bit unique for me because I think I'm usually just kind of grinding and getting the work done. And like that trial sort of is a great example where, you know, yes, it sucked to lose, but I knew that it was something that no employer ever would have trusted me with to do on my own myself. So it was an opportunity that I created for myself from the intake call 5 years earlier all the way through the trial. So yeah, I greatly appreciate this opportunity to reflect a bit.
Absolutely.
All of the kind words, and it's been a pleasure. But absolutely, do a beer, do a get together sometime soon.
Well, thank you for being on the show. I look back, 24, I think 25 years now when we started Amada, and kind of holistic. I look and say, gee, I really want to help people, and you're exactly what I'd hoped to have. I'd have the opportunity to the type of person like you to work with. So thank you very much. Thanks for coming on, Clinton. It's been a great show.
Been a great show.
Thanks for joining us, the 1958 Lawyer. We will be back here every week. So if you haven't been around, we took a couple years off, so we're relaunching the show. So you're going to see a lot more of us. So come tune back in and wherever you get your favorite podcasts.
Thanks for listening to the 1958 Lawyer. If you like the show, tell a friend. And please subscribe, rate, and review us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to hear more about Ron, Clinton, or Amada, go to amataoffices.com. That's amataoffices.com. All the links are also in the show notes.